Today, I'm thrilled to talk about one of my favorite topics, Hollywood's portrayals of narcolepsy. In this episode, I'm joined by Al Jean, the executive producer and head writer for The Simpsons, who has been working on the show for over 32 years. It was such an honor to talk with Al Jean about the development and portrayal of narcolepsy on season 27, episode 1 of The Simpsons, when Homer Simpson is diagnosed with narcolepsy. I'm also joined today by Anna Marr, a Los Angeles-based actor and writer. Anna developed a dark comedy short film called Walking Through Peanut Butter, based on her experience navigating New York's comedy scene with narcolepsy. She's also a Rising Voices of Narcolepsy advocate. Welcome to Project Sleep's podcast. Project Sleep is a 501c3 nonprofit organization dedicated to raising awareness and advocating for sleep health, sleep equity, and sleep disorders. I'm your host, Julie Flygar. We're so glad you're here as we work together towards making sleep cool. On this podcast, all guests express their own opinions. While medical diagnoses and treatment options are discussed for educational purposes, this information should not be taken as medical advice. Each person's experience is so unique, which is why it's so important to always consult your own medical team when making decisions about your own health. If you haven't done so yet, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss a Project Sleep podcast episode. And if you enjoy this podcast, please leave us a rating or review wherever you listen so that we can reach more listeners and raise more awareness. The Narcolepsy Nerd Alert series invites listeners to dive deeper into specific topics relevant to living with narcolepsy. For more on this topic, please check out our corresponding toolkit, available for free on our website to download, print, and share. The link to the toolkit and other Narcolepsy Nerd Alert topics is in the show notes, or you can go to project-sleep.com. Hello, everybody. I'm Julie Flygar. I'm the president and CEO of Project Sleep, and I am here in Los Angeles, and very excited that we have a few guests from Los Angeles today. I reached out to Al Jean, the executive producer of The Simpsons, on Twitter, just as a long shot, just seeing if we could get him to join us. Al has received 9 Emmy Awards.
That's true.
Wow. And a Peabody Award for his work on The Simpsons. And so we're just so excited and grateful for him joining us today to talk about the narcolepsy episode, which we just can't wait to get into. And Anna is an LA-based actor, writer, and a voiceover artist originally from Ohio. So these are our 2 amazing guests. And we're going to go ahead and start with The Simpsons, as we said in this episode from 2015, Every Man's Dream. Then we will talk more about other portrayals of narcolepsy and looking ahead to the future. I'll just maybe read this description that was what we first learned about the episode a few months in advance, as it was going to be a premiere episode, from this description that Al Jean had given in an interview, I think, with Variety. It's discovered after all the years, Homer has narcolepsy, and it's an incredible strain on his marriage. Homer and Marge legally separate, and Homer falls in love with his pharmacist, who's voiced as Lena Dunham. So, Al, I'm just so super curious how the idea came to do this episode.
Well, we wanted, after 700 episodes, it's hard for us to do things we haven't done before. And we wanted this image where you see this thing that's shocking, but actually it didn't happen in real life. It was a dream. One of the other executive producers suggested narcolepsy, and we researched it. We, had Homer taking the proper medication. I admit, I think we didn't research it quite enough initially and talk about what it really is and how serious it is. Thankfully, I had mentioned ahead of the broadcast that we were doing this topic, and Julie tweeted me and said, I hope you're not just covering it like any other Hollywood sitcom. And I said, well, what would I do to avoid that? And she gave a suggestion, which was really well taken, which was, it is a strain, of course. But with our show, Marge is always in the right. So we had Marge less sympathetic than she should have been to his condition. And we rewrote that. So, we always just tend to blame Homer for everything. Of course, you can't blame someone for this. And that's what we changed. And that made it into the final show. And I'm really happy it did.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting because I think there are some parts that really do resonate with the true experience. So right in the beginning, when he's being diagnosed in the initial scene, Marge pulls up, some pictures from past vacations, of Homer sleeping, like, oh, geez, this isn't surprising. And here he's sleeping, and all these different vacation photos. And I watched this with one of my good friends who has idiopathic hypersomnia, which is very similar to narcolepsy. And she's like, "Oh my God, we've done that. We've gone through her pictures and looked at all these pictures of her sleeping." So I was always curious to wonder if there was anyone that knew it more intimately, because that in particular was something that stood out.
Without naming who, a couple of people close to the staff have narcolepsy, and we did obviously talk to them. So that was part of the process. The difficult balancing act always is for anything as serious as narcolepsy. If you're making it a comedy topic, like how you make it funny, and then on the other hand, not take it less seriously than you should. So that's always tricky. But on the other hand, I hope it's just my hope, but that by covering it in a show that actually kids would watch, and that influences people in some way, it would encourage people to take the topic more seriously.
Yeah. And I love the scene that, you said that you added about Homer saying, narcolepsy is serious, Marge. And she says, maybe you're not taking it seriously enough. And I think that was a beautiful message. So,
Yeah, that's Homer. I mean, it's like everything he doesn't do the right way. But yeah, as I said, it's balancing the dynamic of the characters with the actual facts of narcolepsy.
right. I mean, I thought like his part about using narcolepsy card as an excuse for not being able to do things, narcolepsy.
I like that part.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like it too. I would, I mean, not that I would, want to have it, but I would love to be like him, just to use any excuse to get through something.
Yeah. Even like his really mean boss. I'm sorry, I don't know the characters as well as probably anyone else has ever interviewed you, but boss had to be like, oops, sorry, narcolepsy, it's like,
I wish
uh,
there was such a card, and I could, and you all had one. And could use it. Yes.
I know. And and then with the ending, which is kind of like this interesting twist of dream within a dream within a dream. I just was curious. So it sounds like that was probably maybe the start of like what got you guys into it. And it is interesting because dreaming is such a huge part of narcolepsy, and not knowing your dreams from reality and those boundaries that they get so confused. And so I thought that was really creative in a way because of narcolepsy, but maybe that wasn't necessarily meant to be sort of like part of the narcolepsy theme. And I didn't see any comments online that seemed to think that that was part of it from lay public, that they wouldn't probably understand that. But it seemed to me that that was very in line with narcolepsy.
What attracted to me to the story at the beginning was it's a trope to say something was a dream. People hate saying an episode didn't happen. But I thought that what would be interesting is if it was several dreams intertwined and you didn't know what the reality was. Not exactly narcolepsy, but just sort of the way life is sometimes. Like you don't know what's really going on. In the past few years, it seemed like what is reality to me. And the only thing I regret is the last shot should have been Homer and Marge asleep holding hands in bed. After we aired, I said, "Oh, that would have been the way to end it. That through this, they're together and they're holding hands and they're both asleep." But I didn't think to do that. I did it in a later episode.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought it was pretty creative. And I thought, having Lena Dunham as the pharmacist was really interesting, and hearing the name of, that she lists out the different medications. I was curious about some of those really specific references and the mention of hypocretin. Those are so specific. And so people with narcolepsy will really know those. But is it just,
Yeah, we did research, and the writer Stuart Burns was really good about trying to find out what the treatments were. And it's funny because ironically, with our show, 30 years ago, when you researched something, it was impossible. Like you had to like go to a library and bring
yeah.
information. And now you can Google everything. So there's really no excuse for not knowing at this point. And you should be Googling everything and finding exactly what it is you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, I had one more question for you. For people that are looking to get into writing or comedy that have narcolepsy, would you have any advice for them? And I mean, I imagine that the landscape has changed a lot over the last 30 some years, but for some of our young viewers that are interested in creative roles, do you have any
Well,
advice?
I think having a story that's fascinating, although difficult, is always really cool. And I think that the writing advice is the same, of course, that I would give to anybody, which is take a show that you think is really good and write a sample episode of it, and write something that you think is really funny, not something you think that other people will buy because it's hacky. And that's the way I got in, initially a while ago. And that's the way every writer I know has gotten on The Simpsons, is by writing something like a Bob's Burgers or something that really catches our attention and we think is clever and funny. And just if you're a writer, right?
I love that. I lied. I have one more question as well. So maybe I shouldn't preface this as last question. Have you felt that people's sense of humor has changed? You've been with the show for so long, and I went back to watch. I have a love for terrible movies, so I watched Bring It On again recently, and I think that's from like around 1999. And some of the humor, you were like, oh my God, like this is really not appropriate anymore. People don't say those things. And so I was just kind of curious from your perspective, like, do you feel like over time people's sense of humor has changed?
Oh,
And
absolutely. Well, I mean, it's pretty well known that we had a character who that we thought at the time that a character was created who was going to be a diverse addition to the characters on the show. We didn't cast him with an appropriate voice actor then, which I would obviously now if we were doing it. So sort of like backpedaling 30 years, we go, oh, people have been bullied over it, which I regret. Nobody should be bullied over anything. I think that there's no question standards change. And I find myself doing that too, except then I kind of go, like a movie I think is great. The Philadelphia Story opens with Cary Grant hitting Katharine Hepburn in the face, which is horrible. But I still think the movie is worth watching, even though I don't like that scene. And I think there's a point where you have to look at intent or look at the entire picture before saying, everything should just be like considered unviewable or could be viewed with a warning, like Gone with the Wind.
right. But even for creating new content, it just probably seems that people's sense of humor has probably changed over the years.
Yeah, sexual jokes are much more permitted. People really talk about, and obviously things that people would make jokes about a person's sexuality 30 years ago. Now, we did a show about gay marriage, advocating that it should be legal, and that seemed like controversial in 2005. And it's insane that it's controversial. Like nobody says that now. So it's really weird when you're on 30 years. You just have to learn to try to listen to the people and try to see what people want now, and think whatever we've done, we just can't afford to rest on any laurels. We have to, be relevant to the world today.
Well, I think that's really awesome. And I just want to thank you so much. Coming from such a different perspective where I just, often feel very defensive in these positions. And I just really thank you so much for engaging with the community. It's just so nice. We've had a lot of times where people just will never write back, just never even acknowledge.
Oh, I completely appreciated your help. It really made me so happy that you felt that it improved the episode. And any more last questions?
I don't think so. I know you have to run to do something else. So we're just so grateful for you being willing to join us. And it's so nice to meet you and thank you in person.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course. Bye for now.
Bye.
I feel like every day, literally, there seem to be new mentions of narcolepsy that are happening. Anna seems to be finding these often.
I watch a lot of television, and I would say there'll be like months on end where the only conversation between Julie and I in text threads is just like, did you see this? Did you see this? Did you see this from me? And yeah, I do call them out on, I wouldn't say call them out because I don't feel that way. I feel like it's just calling them in, as the phrase is, in terms of us tweeting about it. And I'll tweet at the show, and yeah, like you said, nobody ever answers or recognizes it. So the fact that Al Jean did any of that really goes to show what kind of a showrunner he is, because that's the showrunner's job, is to respond to criticism and be the face of the show. And I mean, obviously he's been doing it for so long for a reason.
Yeah. I think a lot of old series are back on Netflix and stuff. So I went through The West Wing, which does have one mention of narcolepsy, but obviously a portrayal of multiple sclerosis with the president. So I think it's interesting. And I think Gilmore Girls is back on maybe Netflix. And so people have been sending some examples from that. So
if any show has had a long run, it'll be in there. It doesn't matter what year it was made.
Right. So I'm just going to start with this question. Do TV and film portrayals of narcolepsy matter? You might guess by us having a whole broadcast about it that we do think it matters. So we're going to probably try to convince you too that it matters. So I love this quote: culture change precedes policy change. And I have always believed this. It was seemed intuitive to me back after I was diagnosed that there weren't a lot of what I'd seen in movies just weren't what I had experienced. And so that's why I wanted to write my book to try to open people's hearts and minds to the real condition. But also because of policy that I had learned in law school, that I felt that legal shifts often change after society. So if you got people in society to understand and care about something first, then you could get them to be more open to policy change. So, as you think about Project Sleep and often that we are talking about policy and trying to change policy, the same time, culture and society is still so important to us too, because those things go often hand in hand, and sometimes culture precedes policy change. So I just want to start with a quick story that narcolepsy in 1999. Most people, if you ask them, what's the big thing that happened for narcolepsy in 1999, would point to the discovery of hypocretin, the neurotransmitters that help to regulate the boundaries between sleep and waking, that were first discovered to be connected to dogs in narcolepsy and then eventually to humans in narcolepsy. And for narcolepsy type 1, it's this loss of hypocretin that brings on the onset of the symptoms. And so narcolepsy was on the cover of Cell magazine. But there's something else big that happened in 1999 to narcolepsy that most people in the community don't talk about as quite as much. And that is the esteemed Deuce Bigelow male gigolo. So, how could I say that a movie that literally most people think of as kind of like, I don't know how to describe it, kind of like a really bad movie? It's almost so bad it's good. I don't know. I actually have not, I must admit, I haven't watched it in full.
I have not either. I've only seen the narcolepsy scenes. It came out when I was 8, so I was not watching this type of film back then.
Yes, I've seen the narcolepsy scenes and read enough about it. So I do believe those still, even though I've never even seen this movie and it's not even a good claimed movie. I still to this day believe that that movie has probably had a bigger influence on my day to day life living with narcolepsy than the discovery of hypocretin. I hope that changes. I think as new hypocretin treatments come out, maybe that'll change. But I just want to underscore that culture and movies really do play a big impact. And so often a lot of TV shows also mention narcolepsy or make narcolepsy jokes. I've stuck this with just character portrayals, depictions, where they actually have a character that is believed to have narcolepsy. And so also I didn't include any reality TV or people that are actually living with narcolepsy on reality TV. I kept that out. This is just character portrayals. So there's a lot on here. I just want to highlight a little bit. 1999 of Deuce Bigelow. And then we have Moulin Rouge in 2001 and Rat Race in 2001. So I'd say that those three movies are kind of a big, those were kind of all major movies.
The most commonly referenced.
Yes. Kind of had a little trifecta for those couple of years. And of course, the My Private Idaho is another big one back from 1991, kind of an obscure movie. And then more recently, of course, we just have a lot of TV. And then we'll talk about this a little bit later, Ode to Joy and the Mysterious Benedict Society, which is a book series that's now a TV series on Disney.
I am not aware of this. I was kind of aware of the book series. I hope that they have somebody with narcolepsy on that writing staff.
One would hope, but I mean, I'm just hoping the world is changing. I just want to point out too, although there are a ton of portrayals of narcolepsy, as we've just shown you, there is actually no research yet in this area. And that's too bad. And I hope that maybe we can inspire someone that's watching to start doing some research. There is wonderful research in a lot of other areas of TV and film portrayals. And this includes epilepsy. There's quite a few papers about epilepsy portrayals in TV and film. Along with that, seizure first aid, which is kind of like basically like if a seizure happens on the shows like ER and Grey's Anatomy, how do the medical professionals on those shows respond to the seizure? And multiple sclerosis, Tourette syndrome, there's quite a few papers, autism, cancer, HIV and AIDS, CPR and coma, and how people in our public like perceive these things based on TV and film. And of course, it's not just disease communities. There are a lot of other areas where people are watching portrayals. I believe is it GLAD that looks at a lot of perceptions of LGBTQ TV portrayals. Like they like almost every year, I believe, come out with a report showing how the portrayals have been, which is really wonderful to keep track of and to continue to hopefully be in contact with Hollywood and influencing the entertainment industry. When these different research projects analyze the portrayals, there's a lot of different aspects to talk about. So it's how the symptoms are portrayed for these conditions. Some people focus also on how are people's interactions with doctors and treatments. And often treatments not really mentioned at all. And interactions with doctors are seen as very negative, which is, can be true to experience, but sometimes also maybe makes people even more distrusting of doctors, possibly. Also, how are these conditions impacting people's social lives, their work lives, the characters, social, work, and school? So that's another thing that people are looking at. The characters' disclosure and other characters' reactions. For example, in West Wing, when the president, he keeps his multiple sclerosis private for many years, and it's kind of like this hidden secret, right? And then it comes through that he has this. And so you see other characters react to that. And the characters were very upset, mostly that it had been hidden information, but some of those reactions are really interesting to look at. Some of these analyses look at characters like their nature or their likability, which are things like whether the character is considered sympathetic, whether they're like a violent or dangerous character. In epilepsy, a lot of the characters with epilepsy are kind of these violent, dangerous, strange people, sort of, which doesn't often make you think probably great things about people with epilepsy if the characters you see are kind of like dangerously, seeming. And so that's one way to look at it. And then also the character's complexity, which is what else you know about the character. None of us are just people with narcolepsy. We have many different facets, like Anna's love of weird ice cream flavors, which totally appreciate. And
that's the only other thing about me.
well, and maybe a cute dog named Ralph. But there's just everyone has other roles in life of being a family member and friend and whatever. There's so much more to everyone. And so often when a character is distilled down to just a disease or just one aspect of their identity, it can almost make them a little bit less someone that you can relate to. Because if you don't share that same identity with them, but if you learn that they also like weird ice cream flavors and you like weird ice cream, then you're like, oh, that person's like me because we both like ice cream. Maybe I don't have narcolepsy. So it's kind of interesting about characters' complexity is another thing to look at. And so just from this research, I just wanted to point out some of the really cool themes that come across, I think are important when we talk about narcolepsy, that movies are and TV is a visual art form. There's no way around it. You have to be more creative to think about how could you make a hypnagogic hallucination come to life on screen. I don't think it's impossible. I think it is very possible. But if you're not as familiar with these conditions, you probably wouldn't be able to creatively think of how to do that. So very few of these depictions of other diseases too kind of try to take the inside the person's perspective. Maybe there was like one seizure where they took you inside the person's head before they lose consciousness to kind of give you an idea of what they're experiencing. And I think that could be something that could be really powerful, seeing behind the eyes of a person with narcolepsy. So, it's our human nature to simplify things. That's just something we should always keep in mind, that our capacity to understand complexity about other conditions is somewhat limited if you think about what you even know about other conditions. Portrayals often reference other portrayals. When entertainment is just talking to other entertainment and just looking at other media, they might base, like in the epilepsy, they said that some seizures looked like they were based on other depictions of seizures, never like going back to source material of real seizures. So there's also like you can examine these for accuracy, whether these are, the symptoms are displayed accurately, but they're also self-comparison, which is that people that have the conditions like us compare ourselves to what we see. And how do we, evaluate our experience based on what, we see in these characters. and that there's no single, accurate portrayal because everyone's experiences are different with different conditions. So remember, there's always somewhat this tension between realistic and serious portrayals and positive portrayals. And so the wonderful paper about West Wing and the president being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis is that some people with multiple sclerosis said, I don't know how he could be president. His schedule and everything, it's unrealistic. And then other people that have multiple sclerosis said, I love seeing that a president can have multiple sclerosis. Just remember that that's some of the tension that we might see. Is we might see that some people would prefer to see portrayals that show it realistically and seriously, and others might like to see positive portrayals, and also in people's responses. So how people respond, the president having multiple sclerosis. Some people do want to see that there was misunderstanding and that people, his friends weren't getting it.
Right.
Some people love that because they're like, that's actually true to life. That social experience was true to life. Other people are upset by that because they'd rather see the friends and family in the character's show and the character's world respond well, because it would show other people in reality how to model behavior from the show.
Well, and it's also like the tension that we experience in real life as well, especially in terms of like portraying myself coming out into the world as a person with narcolepsy publicly on social media, for example, or even pitching myself to in rooms, in meetings. And it's like, I want you to know that I have narcolepsy and that it's serious and that it impacts my life. But I also don't want you to think that I can't work. I want you to know what my real experience is, but I don't want you to just define me that way. So it's a tough balance.
It really is. That is very well said. I just want to read a few of these quotes from these papers. The epilepsy organization, the major one in America, has like 3 things to do and 3 things not to do. There's very clear guidelines of things you should not do and things you should do when someone's having a seizure. And so this amazing paper that goes through all of these examples of often medical professionals, characters, responding to someone having a seizure in a TV show. They said the first aid management of seizures performed by actors portraying healthcare professionals was inappropriate in nearly half of all cases. And just about why these are important, for most people, a cinematic representation of epilepsy may be the only seizure they ever see. This will inevitably shape their attitude toward this disorder. I think that's probably really true for narcolepsy, because the sleepiness of narcolepsy isn't so. Maybe they've seen someone fall asleep, but often in social situations we kind of rally, right?
I would say hands down, almost all of my friends would say that they don't see how it impacts my life, which you can take as a good or a not good thing.
Right. And so if all they see are these portrayals in movies, that can be their only visual references sometimes to what we have. This is also kind of really, as treatments for epilepsy continue to improve, the number of people who have actually seen seizures may continue to decline. At the same time, the public's images of seizures will increasingly be informed by portrayals on TV and movie that bear little resemblance to epileptic seizures. As you think about narcolepsy too, I think there's somewhat of a similar storyline that as our treatments do get better, there's going to be a little bit less likelihood that you're going to see people having a cataplexy attack in public, or, an episode of sleepiness, hopefully, as treatments improve. But I think that's just kind of a really interesting thing to think about too. One last one. The entertainment narratives do more than educate or misinform people about diseases. Depictions such as the West Wing's portrayal of MS play a role in the social construction of illness, and this process may influence perceptions of self and the experience of social interactions for people with chronic illnesses in a variety of complex ways. So just again, pointing out how there's a lot of self-reflection or self-comparison. I've heard people say this so many times. My sleepiness isn't like you've seen in the movies. I got diagnosed and I couldn't think I had narcolepsy because I didn't recognize my experience based on what I'd seen in movies. However, when I have tried to point this out sometimes and saying that I think the movies are showing sort of like a myth or not a real version, that this isn't really happening, I do seem to get pushback from our own community to say, no, I have fallen asleep while standing. So the only way I can figure out how to put these two kind of things together is that possibly at an extreme version and a severe experience that people can be, falling asleep without warning in a public situation. Probably not like this, because I don't think you could still be standing. You'd have to be like leaning against something, probably.
I still think that there's a variety experience. I don't know. I've heard people say,
but this is certainly not the most typical thing that
no.
a doctor would be looking for, because
No.
if doctors were looking for you to stand up, to be falling asleep while standing in the middle of a conversation, you wouldn't get most people diagnosed. Mine was very, very invisible, but also I think I also wanted to push it out of my head. So I might have repressed how bad it was.
Totally.
And the only other thing I can think about these depictions too is that it's a lot of this misunderstanding of being in the middle of a conversation and maybe like laughing and then collapsing over, and that could actually be cataplexy that people are somewhat showing, as opposed to sleepiness.
Yeah. I think it's really difficult to communicate it. And I'm not giving an excuse, by no means. I just think that people tend to take the easy route out.
Right. Totally. So just a really quick look at the basic of what symptoms do you even see in these. Deuce Bigalow, she's falling asleep in the middle of sentences. Rat Race, he's falling asleep standing. Moulin Rouge, falling asleep in the middle of activities. Ode to Joy is just cataplexy. Narcolepsy is mentioned by name only twice in the movie, but barely, and it's just focused on cataplexy. And so the way that they simplified is to almost leave the rest of narcolepsy out. They put the definition on the screen once at the beginning, but they probably define cataplexy 6 or 7 times throughout it, just to make sure you get it, because it is kind of complex. Just to remind you guys, there are 5 major symptoms generally of narcolepsy: excessive daytime sleepiness and cataplexy. And then we have, of course, hypnagogic hallucinations and sleep paralysis, and then disrupted nighttime sleep. So if you look at the variety of symptoms that people experience with narcolepsy versus what's being portrayed, it's not representative of the variety of symptoms. Just a few other really quick kind of interesting theories, or things I wanted to bring to your attention from the research world, is this concept of disparagement humor. And it's basically that a non-serious humor mindset suspends the usual like serious critical mindset. And so that allows you to possibly have different standards for what's allowable, to say somewhat. So if you were to say something, you said a joke to me, and the recipient, I'm receiving the joke. If I reject what you've said as a normative standard, so if you say something that I don't think is okay, the source, the person that said the joke, can just say, oh, it was just a joke. Not serious. I didn't really mean it. And so disparagement humor can justify a wider range of negative responses towards members of a targeted group. And in the context of disparagement humor, discriminatory behavior can be easily rationalized as falling in with the boundaries of socially acceptable. So humor is not bad. Humor is also medicine. There are wonderful things about humor, but sometimes humor is inside-outside group, and sometimes can be used to be a little bit more discriminatory towards marginalized populations. Just to look at narcolepsy stigma and understand that stigma is at many levels. And some people have, media and entertainment are sort of like create the culture, I believe, that leads to law and policies. And all levels of stigma is important, which is stigma is a concept of othering people, that they're separate from us, and then sometimes lesser than us. Just some context for that. And you can look up more about stigma. And, your story really matters and can help to reduce stigma. And you can foster empathy, and storytelling is such a powerful vehicle for doing good too. So what can we do? We have some reactive efforts. I'm just going to quickly go through what we worked with on for Ode to Joy, which is a movie that came out in 2019, and then Walking Through Peanut Butter, which is Anna's amazing project. So just really quickly, there was this American Life segment. So this is, as Anna said, it's based on a true experience of a man, Matt Freaking, who I've actually met, a wonderful scientist. That the episode of This American Life on NPR was based on his experience. So real man. And he does talk about having narcolepsy and cataplexy, and how his sleepiness affects his relationship, and his cataplexy, he had very severe cataplexy, affected his relationship. And so from that NPR segment, actually a few movies were inspired by that. A short movie called Cataplexy, which is on Amazon Prime. And then also this movie, and the announcement came out just the next year that a Modern Family director and a Colbert writer were teaming up to make a comedy called Joy that was based on this NPR segment. And basically that, the thought of joy as a trigger that be problematic in a relationship. And so I started reaching out as soon as I heard about it in 2012, reaching out to people who knew people that were involved with this and did speak to them. They said that they would get in touch with me later when they were closer. I offered to do free consulting, however I could help. And the movie kind of shifted around from a few different production houses, I believe. And so it came back on my radar in early 2018. I saw it had a new home, I guess, in Hollywood. And I started looking for connection, gathering advice and research examples, which is why I got into all the research of how do other communities deal with this kind of stuff. And I realized at that point it had already been filmed. So they'd already done the filming in 2017. I found that via Instagram. So it had been filmed, but what else could be done, right? Eventually, I tried many different things. I made contact in early 2019, and this was by guessing email addresses. Essentially,
oh my gosh,
how I made contact. My first guess was wrong. My second guess was right. And the person wrote back very, very quickly, which was nice, but said they would kind of be in touch later. I was like, how about now? And then the film was going to be in the Phoenix Film Festival. And we have 2 board members now in the Phoenix area. So I flew to Phoenix to see it there because it's one of the first places you could actually see it. And so I watched it there in a packed audience for the first time. And the narcolepsy community really, more broadly found out about all this in that same time period because the movie was starting to be reviewed as people were watching it in film festivals. So people with narcolepsy started to get really concerned about this, what was happening. There were some delays in the production. And then I'll never forget, July 8th, finding out, all right, it's a go. It's going to be released with IFC Films. And so, it took about a week to get a call with IFC Films. And then another week, I was able to actually speak to the director. And the movie came out August 9th. So it was just exactly a month from when we found out and then it was going to be opening. And this is the timeline of the opportunity to try to work with them at such a late stage. And I have to say, very thankful that it was a woman with idiopathic hypersomnia who actually worked in the film industry who helped me make the connection to the director. And I asked him to do a PSA together, a public service announcement about narcolepsy for social media, to create resource information for the closing credits. That basically something like, if anything that you've seen in this movie seems similar to experience of you or a loved one, please find a sleep specialist. So it wasn't even about Project Sleep. It was just about getting people to see a sleep specialist because none of that behavior is, well, he does have a sleep specialist in the movie, but still just to reinforce that this is a real condition and to do media training for the stars and the director and to do a discussion guide and have the ability to use the poster on the cover. So we were able to do most of that except for the credits. They said it was too late. Those had been locked for many months, which is disappointing because I had been trying for many months. But we were able to do the other things, which is really great. In addition, we did some more of our own things. I made a cheat sheet for sleep doctors so they could understand about the film, what they needed to know was depicted so they could talk to patients about it and publish a review and put up stuff on our website and this discussion guide. And we did do the PSA. I just really want to quickly mention that I was talking about this with my best friend, and she has a friend that works at Netflix. And that friend said that they thought, never would the director do this with me, that this would be unheard of to do something like a PSA within an organization like mine. It's just really interesting to see that even still in 2019, that someone else in the industry would say, never, ever would someone do a PSA with an organization when their whole movie is based about a condition that we live with. And now we get to talk about Walking Through Peanut Butter, Anna's amazing project.
So a very basic synopsis is 22-year-old workaholic Jessie moves to the city that never sleeps to be a stand-up comic. She also has narcolepsy, a chronic sleep disorder even she knows little about. In this short pilot, Jessie discovers a new symptom, sudden muscle weakness triggered by strong emotions. Her trigger, laughter. So in general, it's about a stubborn, overachieving new college grad, Jessie, who dives headfirst into the comedy world of the city that never sleeps, which is the perfect place to adapt to her newly diagnosed narcolepsy. And I had originally wanted to write a full 22-minute pilot, a comedy pilot, and, resources. I was living in New York City at the time. I'm now in LA, and I'm a writer and an actor. So I wanted to have something written, and I also wanted a footage. It's really important as an actor to make your own work. So I ended up shortening it down to more of like a digital content length, which is great because when I produced the film, essentially it is a 10-minute short film. So it's really easy to just slip into film festivals that way. But it is a dark comedy based on my own experiences navigating the New York City comedy world while living with narcolepsy, and the wonderful irony and conflict of being a stand-up comedian whose cataplexy trigger is the punchline of her jokes. That aside, Hollywood loves a story about a really nice person who unravels into a mess. And we've gotten into a few festivals, which have or have not happened, given the state of the pandemic. And yeah, we won an award. Our first award was at the Independent Shorts Award here in LA for Best Women's Short.
How do those awards play into the process? I know it seems like I know it's probably very commonplace to you, but like I'm a little outside that world. And so can you explain to us sort of how this process happens?
Yeah, so it's one of the many ways that you can gain recognition and exposure just to get your story on the map and to the eyes of various gatekeepers and players in the industry. Especially for me as somebody who had just moved to Los Angeles from New York City and is still making connections here. Submitting your project, whether it's a script or a film or a web series, to film festivals or script festivals is a great way to make those connections, and it can open doors and also help you if you've gotten some good festival recognition. It can help you pitch yourself to various industry people.
I think that there are a lot of really interesting, and that's why I wish Ode to Joy had included some more experts or consultants from the narcolepsy patient community, because I think there were opportunities there to see a character develop. One of my favorite quotes is, "We're always evolving." And some of that evolution is what draws you to different characters from TVs and movies, is the shared humanity of evolving, right?
Yeah, I think that so many shows, especially with young adults, I think that there's a lot of shows about identity, right? And like, it doesn't matter how specific the story is. In fact, in comedy, they tell you that the more specific, the funnier. If you're writing, say, for example, like the fact that in that Simpsons episode, they use the word hypocretin. Like, literally, how much more specific could you get? Like you said, only a small percentage of people watching that episode knew what that word meant, but it was funny probably to hear that, a funnier sounding word. But when you list out specifics, it tends to be more universal than if you just try to generalize, because people can find their way through a really nuanced, specific, niche story more than they can through something that's trying to be just like appealing to everybody. Something that's really exciting to me that I've spoken to you about before, Julie, in terms of pitching this show, because it can be hard. You're not sure if people are going to want to hear about the specifics of narcolepsy or what I just talked about, and you need to have sort of a different angle in terms of theme and message. And I think that part of the younger generations right now, who are simultaneously members of the burnout generation and also constantly the targets of the self-care industry, who better to talk about that than a person with narcolepsy or idiopathic hypersomnia or a sleep disorder in general?
I want to know if you have any advice for people that are interested in telling their story through comedy or writing, similar to what I asked Al.
Yeah, I think for me, my vehicle is humor in comedy, so I'm going to stick with that lane. I'm just going to echo the specificity and sticking with your own experience. I think it's really easy to get lost in, this is going to be representative of like all people with narcolepsy. What about people who have severe cataplexy? There's no such thing as like one accurate portrayal. to stick to your own perspective, because that's all you can speak for with your own story, while also being responsible and respectful of other people's experiences and not making generalizations. Find other people who celebrate your story. If you are in a community of people that don't want to hear about it, if you're in a community of people that is not going to accommodate any of your access needs, who aren't interested in having conversations about ableism, thinking about using more responsible language, it's okay to find a new community. And they're out there, we're out there. Find people online who are doing things that you really relate to and reach out to them. And it's just good to find other like-minded people to support you so you feel emboldened to share.
One more question, then how do you manage the process and knowing that you're making progress and hold yourself accountable over time to get this done?
The best piece of advice is to do your best to not beat yourself up. It's really tempting to look at how much someone on Instagram has written in a day. If you feel this constant pressure, it's a structural issue within the industry and within culture at large.
Wise words. Let's just go through a few of these additional resources. I think this one we didn't mention yet, but it's a great one, Respectability. They do a lot of great things, but some of what they do is reaching out to entertainment professionals to promote positive, accurate, diverse, and inclusive media portrayals on TV and in film, both in front of and behind the camera. And they have a very cool summer lab program for entertainment professionals with disability.
They had a ton of great content that they still have online on their website. They had different stars of different TV shows on, and it was just great to hear from everybody. So I recommend checking that out.
Oh, cool. All right. So that's a great one. And then Real Abilities Film Festival. I think that last I saw is something like 14 different cities across the country.
Oh, wow.
But they're the largest film festival in the U.S. dedicated to promoting awareness and appreciation of the lives, stories, and artistic expressions of people with different disabilities. This is just one of my favorite, more general podcast episodes from the Stanford Social Innovation Review, I think is what the name of that SSIR stands for. And it's a storytelling and social change episode. And there's a lot of great quotes, but one of them is, it's about how you create an ecosystem that can allow for authentic stories to be told. And they have some really cool people from entertainment talking about different communities and representations. And of course, Rising Voices of Narcolepsy, our program to foster a new generation of narcolepsy patient advocates, spreading awareness via speaking and writing, while also empowering the participants. So Anna was one of our early, I think you were 2017, were you a first year?
Indeed.
Yes, and she was a writer, and the name of her first essay, I think, was Walking Through Peanut Butter.
No, it was Laugh at Me, Not My Narcolepsy.
Yes, but then it was a line in there where you talked about walking through peanut butter, yes.
Well, thank you, everybody. It really, truly means the world. I would not have been able to finish the project without Julie's help and her wider network and all of the incredible people with narcolepsy who really came out and were the predominant, hands down, largest majority of the supporters for our crowdfunding campaign. And I truly cannot thank you enough.
All right, guys, thank you for tuning in and being part of this community. And we're just hoping to share many more portrayals of narcolepsy that move towards some that resonate more with our experiences. All right, bye for now.
Bye.
The Project Sleep podcast is produced by Carver Sound Productions. For more information on podcast production services, visit carversoundproductions.com.